Hello, my name is Brightynn Wigington, and today I will be presenting the evolution of science fiction and doing a light exploration of science fiction genre from before and after the World Wars, just kind of throughout times, starting all the way back in the 1500s, all the way forward to now. So, science fiction is an imagined future with scientific and technological influence. And this rise in science fiction really kind of started, it obviously started back in the 1500s, but it progressed more in the 1800s and grew with the Industrial Revolution in 1760 to 1840. The rise in technology during the Industrial Revolution really striked the imaginations of science fiction writers, and the advancements during the Second World Wars would actually lead to have the same effect. So a couple of things I will mention during this presentation is the change of science fiction pre- and post-World Wars. We will go a little bit into detail about utopian literature and a little bit into dystopian literature. So one of the things I do want to mention is the appearance of aliens in science fiction, and we didn't really see this until post-World War II. So this actually can be connected to the Red Scare in 1919 and 1920, and this was actually interwar, so it was between the two world wars, and the Red Scare was actually a kind of beginning of fear of communists, and this came about from the First World War when we had the Soviet Union as a enemy at the time, and so this entire area of time people were just very afraid of communists, and their fear of communism would lead to reach all the way up to through the Cold War and further. Another example of how aliens played a role in some new science fiction novels is that they were a solution to the world's constant conflict. And so these novels could be a reflection of how they wished that the tension between countries could be solved. Another stressor that really influenced science fiction of this time were atomic bombs. And these came along in World War II and was a huge threat on the people, which I can't imagine how scary it would be. They created a new sense of fear and paranoia in literature. You can see kind of the area of time when you look at literature when they kind of came into play. And so in 1949 it became even more of a threat when the Soviet Union was able to recreate their own, and this was about 4 years after World War II, I think. And so the creation of the atomic bomb and how much destruction they could cause actually kind of fed into the new negative portrayal of science and technology in science fiction after World War II. An example of this is The Barnhouse Effect by Kurt Vonnegut, and this was published in 1950, and that was about 5 years after World War II, and only 1 year after Soviet Union had created their own. And so in a moment of this essay that he had written, he mentions there was a specific wording that he says, the power that Mr. Barnhouse had could be compared and maybe even more powerful than a Nagasaki-type bomb. And so you can see the influence of atomic bombs already feeding into literature of the time. So speaking of utopian literature, it is an imagined future where science and/or technology assists in their perfected lives, where everything is just perfect and green and shiny and new. And a couple of examples of these two things, of utopian literature, is one the very first ones that have ever existed is Utopia by Sir Thomas More, and this was published in 1516, and it was actually a time when he coined the term at the very beginning of utopia, the term utopia. And then another example of this is Men Like Gods by H.G. Wells, and that was published in 1923. And this novel is about a utopian society in a parallel universe where there's no governmental presence. And they're just all happy and free, and there's, like I said, no government. And then in dystopian literature, this is the exact opposite of utopian, and it's an imagined society where everything is horrible and uninhabitable, and it could have been caused by science and or technology. And this was actually a newer idea after World War II. Dystopian literature hadn't really existed before World War II, so that's actually really interesting. And so an example of this is 1984 by George Orwell, and this was published in 1949. And he is actually a huge figure in the dystopian literature. And in his book 1984, he mentioned it's written about 3 zones of Earth that are always constantly at war with each other, and there's always constant large governmental presence, which is a stark contrast to H.G. Wells' novel I mentioned earlier. And going back for a second, I just want to mention that Sir Thomas More and H.G. Wells were both considered fathers of science fiction, and so you kind of really see where it really began to take shape then. And then it kind of forms into dystopian as well, so you have those 2 branches of science fiction. And then here I have a timeline that kind of just lays out visually kind of where it kind of began and where it starts to feed into different branches, like I said, and it might take it a moment to load. Maybe more than a moment. Alright, fast forward. So you kind of see here, let me go ahead and full screen it. It starts kind of in 1800s is where it really became a thing, more than in 1516, and it grew to the wide range genre we have today. So it started in 1516, where Sir Thomas More coins the term utopia and publishes the novel Utopia. And then in 1760 to 1840 is the Industrial Revolution, and this is when a big bang of new machines and inventions come out, and this really strikes the imaginations of writers of the day. In 1914 and 1918 we have World War I. 1919 and 1920 is the Red Scare, right after World War I. And this was just, like I said, a general fear of communism of this time. In 1923, this is when Men Like Gods by H.G. Wells was published, and this was a utopian novel. In 1939 to 1945, we have World War II, and then 1949 is when 1984 is published by George Orwell. And this is when dystopian really comes into play. And now in 2021, in present day, we have a wide range of science fiction novels, and we can trace our important technological moments in history through literature such as science fiction. And I think that's pretty interesting. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.